and welcome back to War Thunder. Guess what? There was a 2vs2 tournament over the weekend, and as you might know, due to my other previous 2vs2 tournament videos, I absolutely love these tournaments. It's just absolutely amazing and fascinating to be part of these experiences where you get to go up against other pilots of your caliber, seeing what strategies they employ and just how they work with their planes. It's so fascinating for myself to be able to be part of it, and I think it's also really cool for you guys to be able to see what the top tier of pilots in arcade battles are like against each other. So this was a tournament that didn't have quite the same amount of high stakes as the previous one. In fact, it's the top 102 pilots in this tournament got 300 golden eagles and also the 2vs2 duelist title, whereas in the previous tournament the rewards were a lot better. So I have to say first and foremost that I don't think the skill level was as high in this tournament, at least from what I initially noticed. But it still brought out a lot of the old faces from the previous tournament, because I think a lot of those previous faces really enjoyed it, and just any opportunity where these experiences can come up again is something to be welcomed. So the first game I showed you guys there was just something basic, just to introduce you to what this whole tournament was like. It was just really easy in the first stages, killing off complete randoms who weren't even squatted up, because that's something that can happen. You can either squad up with randoms or you can bring in your own squad, and of course if you have your own squad then that means better communication, and so you have a much better chance of actually winning. So being up against randoms was a complete cakewalk, and at first I didn't really know what plane I wanted to use. I was using the Yak 1, but then I switched over to the P39 because I wanted to see how it was actually like, since, well, it has a really good engine, has good climb rate, powerful gun as long as it can actually hit, and there's just a lot of pros and some cons to it. Now, I was actually really surprised and taken back by how lopsided this plane was when it was turning. If you notice my turning there on the enemies, there's a lot of moments where I kind of started wobbling out of control, and that was enough for me to know that the P39 was just not the plane for me to use. Now, the first foe that we came up against, by the way, I'm actually teamed up with Windwalker here, who was my teammate in the last tournament. Our first opponent, major opponent that we came up against, was actually not a set of players, but a plane itself, and that was the I-16 Eshak, and I think it was the Type 24 most specifically, where you noticed in the first encounter just how easily those planes set you on fire. Where in the head-on, the stealth ammo, you couldn't even see the bullets come at me, actually set me on fire instantly. And the reason why, I think, is because every single bullet in their 7.92 millimeters has a incendiary component within it. So although the alpha damage on the I-16 is almost, well, it's very low, it has a very good chance of actually setting you on fire for 7.92 millimeters. Now, Windwalker here is in a situation where he's up against an I-16. I actually died, and so did one of the enemies, but now it's him versus the I-16. First of all, the Yak 1 is kind of like a bread and butter kind of plane, where it doesn't really excel in any particular thing, nor does it really have any sort of disadvantages in any particular category. However, it has a 20mm cannon, and that allows you to spray and pray. Overall, it's quite a balanced plane for the tournament. Now, the I-16 has a few advantages over Windwalker, namely a better climb rate and also a better turn time as well. However, the Yak 1 has better speed. However, in a straight, which Windwalker was using a lot of times against the I-16, it can actually outspeed it and hence get away from the I-16. However, my gosh, that was really close. Luckily for Windwalker, although he was set on fire, that fire was not permanent. And so he could actually take out the I-16, who he damaged his engine. Now again, in the next matchup, it's me and Windwalker versus another I-16. We came to realize that taking out the I-16 was probably the priority target. And a lot of times these matchups were mixed up, so they might be where the enemy has a Yak 1 and an I-16, like in this matchup. So I had to be really careful of everything at the same time, and hence why I'm trying to dodge this Yak 1. It's being aware of where both enemies are at the same time, because literally they can just come out of nowhere, like this Yak 1. I thought he was way off the side, and nope, he was actually coming back in. The I-16, as I was saying, is the hardest thing to actually take on. He's the priority target. Although not many people used it in the high tiers of this tournament, and I think there's a few reasons for it, it was probably just the most annoying plane to take on. Like I said, it doesn't have a lot of alpha damage to it. Its guns are relatively weak, however it still has a decently high chance of setting you on fire. But apart from that, its only really good flight characteristics is the fact that it can turn better and it can climb better, which I think a lot of people at the higher tiers didn't think was enough to warrant the use of the I-16. And so they'd rather prefer something with better guns or just a better climb rate like the P-39, so then they could just make you stall. So it looks like an exact mirror of what's happening in the previous match, where the I-16 is on Windwalker. I feel so sorry for him. It's like I leave him with one enemy down at least, but then I leave him with the I-16 to contend with. It's just not fun to do. So they get into a turn fight, but luckily for him, the I-16 didn't have a good shot on Windwalker, and so that opened up a bit of a gap of distance between the two, so then he could go in a straight. Now for literally over 3 minutes, they had a chase across the map, and of course I'm not going to show you guys this entire chase because that would be a bit boring. But eventually he gained enough distance where he could turn around in time and go in for a head-on. Now I have to give Windwalker a lot of props here, because what you're going to see here is a lot of ridiculousness. Something that I wouldn't have done personally, but I guess only Windwalker could pull it off. So rather than going again in a straight and getting a mass amount of distance, he decides, you know what, screw it, I'm done. I am actually going to dogfight the I-16. That's right, I'm going to try to outturn something that turns better than me. But only Windwalker could do this right, couldn't he? So the I-16 gets in a lot of shots, Windwalker is smoking, and now this is where the I-16 gets into a fatal mistake. Rather than continuing a turn, which he could outturn the Yak-1, he goes up into a vertical climb and actually stalls a little bit, giving Windwalker a slight opportunity, but still not enough. And yet again, he's climbing a bit up and then falling off to the side, exposing himself even more. What he really should be doing is just turning, simple as, and not doing these vertical climbs. It's putting him in a situation where Windwalker has a good opportunity to actually shoot at him. And so Windwalker risked it, and he reaped the rewards. Well done to him. Only Windwalker could do something like that. Very good pilot. Now in this next matchup, what happens if the enemy team is not a mixed combination with an I-16 in there? What if both planes are I-16s? Well, it turns out to be a big headache, isn't it? The planes are good, don't get me wrong, but with two Yak-1s, it could really be easy work to take them out as long as our guns get on them, and that's why they're more of a headache. It's just a matter of getting our guns actually on them. So we tried to go out into a cross sort of strategy where Windwalker would actually go for the guy that's directly in front of me, and I would go for the guy that's directly in front of him. That way we've got our backs covered on each other. Ideally what's supposed to happen is that we engage in head-ons with the I-16s and then we cross over to each other's targets. That way, yeah, we have our backs covered. Now it looks like the I-16 here is right on the sights of Windwalker and he's not going to give up. However, I've got tracers behind me and I know that's another I-16 that's on my tail. So then rather than continuing with that turn, which the I-16 of course is going to win against me, I decide to pull off and also reload, and I leave Windwalker in the lion's den by himself. I have to say sorry to Windwalker for doing that. However, I think that's just something that has to happen sometimes in these 2vs2 tournaments. You have to get back a little bit, reassess the situation, and see if you can find a window of opportunity, like that example right there. I-16 coming on down right in front of me, completely exposed, get an easy shot on him. Other I-16 realizes that his teammate is dead, I'm behind him, and so he pulls off. But now check this out. It means that I can go in, I fly away, then Windwalker goes in, he gets his chance, then Windwalker flies away, and it becomes a vicious cycle of basically like a tactic that German B and Z planes do a lot of times, especially in realistic battles, where one goes down, and then flies away, and another one boom and zooms, and so on and so forth. It repeats. And eventually, we finish them off. Now, in this next matchup, unfortunately, Windwalker had to leave because he had real-life commitments. So then I partnered up with somebody called Anown from Fufu, and he's a very, very good player. So what we went up against was this Yak-1 and P39N combination. Now, I feel like what these players did wrong was that they didn't develop the strengths to their planes right from the get-go, especially the P39. Because the P39 has an amazing climb rate, so I feel like what players should do as soon as they get out into a match is that if they have a really good climb rate, then they should try to develop a decent altitude advantage over the enemies. Unfortunately, the P39 really didn't do that, so he was on the same playing field as us, and if anything, he actually put himself at a disadvantage, because we have a better turn time than the P39, yada yada. And so when he's on our playing field, then that means we can take him on quite easily. So I damaged the P39 quite a bit, and I think actually he lost his engine, because you'll notice that he falls to the ground and he's not going to have a lot of speed that he can build up again. Yak-1 starts to dodge me because I think he realizes that his P39's in trouble, and he sees me actually behind him. So he's not going to try to give me any clear shots, but luckily I do manage to get a critical hit on his left aileron. Now, this puts me in a bit of an awkward situation what's about to happen here. He's spiraling downwards, and the P39, who's clearly, I think he lost his engine, he's actually going up towards me. Now, it's awkward because if I continue going for the Yak-1, then the P39 is essentially going to have shots on me by going on to me. However, if I go for the P39, then that means I have to go for a head-on with him, and then the Yak-1 could get behind me. So I decided that the Yak-1 was the best shot, because the P39 actually lost his engine, then trying to climb up for me probably won't last him a long time with speed, and so he's going to bleed a lot of that speed, and luckily that's actually what happened. Now, take a look at this. Yadagan and Tatuna. You guys have never seen Tatuna before, but if you watched my previous 2vs2 tournaments, well, you probably remember Yadagan. I have a lot of respect for Yadagan in this tournament, and actually something that you can say in general about these tournaments is that I think a lot of the high tier players have a lot of respect for each other. There's sort of like a bro code that goes behind the scenes where everyone just has respect for each other because they all want to learn different tactics and different strategies and just how everyone uses their planes. And it's kind of like a learning experience. However, that game wasn't a good representative of what every single match was against Tatuna and Yatagan. We did lose against them, but what they were actually doing there was they were, I believe, number 1 and 2 on the leaderboard, so they were actually experimenting with different strategies. Unfortunately, the strategy that they employed meant that they were below us in altitude, and so they didn't actually win, of course. Now, this is another matchup with me and Anown, and it's against another pair of enemies, and here is, again, another example of where the enemies didn't build up the advantages, where the P39 didn't build up an altitude advantage, and so it was really easy to take them on. And just as you thought Yatagan and Tatuna were gone, nope, they're back. Now what you'll notice between Anown and I is that we're diving slightly before we engage the enemy. Windwalker and myself fondly know this as the Yatagan maneuver. That's what we've actually called it, because we learned that from Yatagan in the previous tournament, where he would actually do a slight dive before an encounter against us, and that allowed him to build enough speed where he could actually outturn us, and so we fondly called it that name. But luckily for myself, Anown is a very, very experienced player. He's very, very good, and we took out Yatagan and Tatuna again. So this dropped them a few places and allowed us to climb a number of places. So we took on different enemies. Now, Yatagan came up with another strategy that he told Anown, and Anown told me. So we applied it in this game, and it curtails where Anown and myself split up right at the very beginning. He goes directly to the left, I go directly to the right. Now the enemy, as a result, has a choice. They can either both go for one target or split up. Now if they both go for one target, then that means that the person who's being chased goes off the map and out of the circle. So if the enemies keep on chasing him, then they have to go out of the circle. And that means that I can keep capping, for example, if I'm still in the cap circle and on the opposite side of the map. Whilst that's happening, if they're both chasing after my teammate, then I can build up altitude advantage, and then I come back on the enemies, and by the time I meet up with the enemies, I'll have a massive altitude advantage over them. However, if they split up, then at least the head-ons will be just 1 versus 1, and never a situation where it's 2 versus 1. And so it really works out for the best for our team. And so what has happened this match was, it looked like both enemies were going for a noun, but they obviously realized what was happening. If they both went out of the circle, then of course we would win because I'm still in the circle. And so they broke off. The yak one came for me. However, I managed to dogfight him to success and take him out. Fortunately, the P-39 is now coming for me, and he gets a shot right on my wingtip. Now I'm in a very bad state. However, even though I've got a wingtip missing, I can still do a head-on. It's just my controls aren't so well. But luckily, this is a 2 versus 1, and so a noun most definitely has an advantage here because he's always on the tail of the enemy. And so we make quick, easy work of them towards the end there. Now we applied the same strategy in the next game, and it looks like the enemies fell for the bait again. So both of them were heading towards a noun, and this allows me to build up altitude advantage. However, I think then they realized what was happening, and so both of them started to come my direction, so then I started to reverse around, so it allowed a noun to build up altitude advantage whilst the enemies are chasing after me. And so we are really just developing our advantage over the enemies whilst they are chasing us. But eventually what they do happen to realize is that, okay, right, we're playing on their terms, we're going to split it up. One yak comes for me, the other goes for a noun. And so I turn in on the enemy, and it's going to turn out to be into a head-on. Now, what you might notice between the different matches in this video is that my belt is constantly changing between default and stealth ammo. I didn't quite realize what was the best belt to use. You'd think that stealth would be the best, but I actually think default is. It has fragmentation in it, and it seems to be a lot better at setting planes on fire and also getting pilot knockouts. So you'll see me alternating the belts between the different rounds, but eventually I came to the conclusion that the default was the best. So I have this situation here where I'm dogfighting one yak, and luckily for me, I think my turning abilities are better than him, and so I instantly get on his tail. However, man, he is not giving me any opportunity to get a good shot. All of these are leading into hits, but nothing critical to damage him. And so, if he can somehow pull out something, or if I make a mistake, then this could instantly change around. So what you'll notice is that I'm doing a lot of throttle control here, and it's very important to try to match what your enemy is doing, because I think he's throttle controlling as well, hoping that I won't be reducing my speed, and if anything, I'll overshoot him. However, I'm keenly aware of what the outcome would be of such a situation, and so reducing my throttle as much as possible, and eventually this is what his mistake turns out to be. I get some decent hits on him there, and finally the hits all just accumulated, and I got a pilot knockout on him. Now, this is the last game that I'm going to be showing you guys, and I think it's quite a beauty. It's probably the most epic out of all of them, and you'll find out exactly why in just a moment here. Now, this was before Anown and I started using the new strategy, where we were doing more so the Yatagan maneuver. I do quick work of the Yak one here, just absolutely finishing him off, and so you'd think that this is quite straightforward. Okay, me and Anown versus another Yak one, the last one on their team, but we both want the kill. Oh man, this has never happened to me in a 2 vs 2 tournament, but you know what greed is like, isn't it? I don't think we didn't intentionally mean for this to happen. Yep, you seen that right. Oh my gosh, we crashed into each other, except Anown is dead. My controls are absolutely screwed up because I'm missing a wingtip. You would think that I'd be absolutely screwed now because the Yak 1 has little damage to him, except, oh my god, I get an amazing shot where I can snap off his wing. Man, I think if he broke off that spiral right there and just went into a normal turn, I think, yeah, he could have probably killed me. But that was really lucky. Disaster averted. Whew. So anyway, guys, that's the last match I'm going to be showing you. I think it was a lot of fun, this 2vs2 tournament. There wasn't any major high stakes, only 300 golden eagles and a title that I already have. But it was a lot of fun. And if you guys are curious, what was my highest position throughout this tournament? Yep, it was #1. So I have to say a big props, thank you to Windwalker and the Noun for playing with me. Also, massive respect to Yadagan for coming up with these strategies. Really cool guy. I actually talked with him. He's a Russian, but he speaks English, and he's just a really cool guy. And just a massive shout out to all the opponents in this tournament. It was a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to the next one. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, feel free to leave any comments in the comment box below. But until the next video, this is Krebs, and I'll catch you guys next time.
Here we go. Now we blasting off into the ozone. The way we kick it in the dojo is local for show. Though we paving the road that's opposed to the dojo. Cause the captain